Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Ian Phillips, who's the production designer for A Man on the Inside. And firstly, I wanted to talk about your history working with Mike Schur and a lot of the creative team that work on this show, and how that really lent itself to the way that you were able to come in and just have a really clear idea, hopefully, of what they were envisioning for this series as you were collaborating and figuring out what it might look and feel like on the screen.
Yeah, I've been working with Mike and Morgan since Parks and Recreation, so a good long time. Done some pilots with them, done some series, Good Place. Yeah, it's interesting working with people who you've worked with for a very long period of time, because you get a shorthand and it makes it easier, I think, to come up with a design and talk about a design. And I think also Mike and Morgan both trust in what I'm doing and know that what I'm going to provide is going to be a set or many sets that, really understand what the show is going to be about.
And so many of the sets and the feel of the show revolves around Ted Danson's character, Charles. And in starting and talking about his home in the series, it's this kind of like mid-century modern feel. And it also feels like it's stuck in time a little bit because his wife passed away and he's very stuck in time. And so how did you want to kind of evolve the feeling around him in the show and have it feel like there was a little bit more movement and light and life around him as he kind of starts to open himself up?
It's interesting to talk about that house in particular because it is very subdued tones. It's a lot of wood tones. It was built in the 60s. Part of the reason that we chose it was because Charles was an engineer and we wanted it to feel very linear and sort of, after his wife passed away, he kind of got rid of everything. And so we wanted it to feel homey, but at the same time, a part of him. And then when we actually moved into the retirement home, we wanted to see something completely different. We wanted to see something that was bright and cheery and something that I think he never really thought he would live in. So we chose, brighter colors. We chose patterns. There was a lot of discussion about how to make it feel new and clean and very a stark contrast to what his home was.
Because it's interesting with what you're describing there about the retirement community and having it feel very new, because when you look at the details in his home, it kind of feels like some of the cupboards and some of the wood paneling and some of these details have been there for decades. And
exactly.
Was it quite hard for everyone to find a location that kind of matched that aesthetic? Because a lot of those sorts of homes have usually been updated.
Yes, it was a challenge. I mean, I think we looked at probably 14 or 15 different locations, all sort of in that style of a mid-century home. A lot of them had kitchens that had been redone. The living rooms had been redone. But this house, the owners actually preserved the original features, and it was great because we were able to walk in there and go, okay, this is the winner. And for as much as the rest of the company and the production, the filming side, they really disliked this house because it's up a very steep hill. We loved it because it looked so beautiful, and you could look out the windows and see the whole city the hills across, and you didn't really know where you were at because we are filming in Los Angeles. We wanted it to feel like the Oakland Hills, and so we had to convey that as well. A lot of times we would look at houses that overlook the city or something very iconic in LA and like Silver Lake. So we tried to steer away from things like that.
And when we then follow him into this retirement community, it also feels like you had to be really careful about the space that you designed around him, because he hasn't been there for a long time. He's just arrived, unlike the other residents who've really settled in and kind of nested in these spaces. And also he can't really have personal items because if he has so much as a picture of his daughter, it's going to give
It gives
everything
it away.
away.
That's right.
And so
That's
how
right.
did that set the space of what you felt like it really needed to be for him?
We had a lot of discussions about how Charles was going to sort of interact with his space. And I think it was sort of an unspoken rule that Charles never was going to remain there. And he didn't want to be there because his wife, as we found out, went into memory care. So I think there was always this little bit of don't put anything too personal, not only because it gives away the mystery, but also because he doesn't really want to be there. As it turns out, he does actually like it there and makes friends, but it takes him a while. And so I think designing that, we had to feel like it was a retirement home first and foremost, but then also a space that he would be comfortable in. And it's tough when you can't put a lot of artwork on the walls or, give a lot of personal touches, which is one of the things I think as a designer you want to do, is really incorporate the character. And so we had to sort of create like a sub character for Charles, the spy Charles, and sort of, he still had personal elements like his book and that sort of stuff. But you're right. I mean, we couldn't put any pictures of his daughter in there because that would give it away. And so, yeah, there was certainly some challenges in designing his personal space.
But with what you just said about how it's always really fun to figure out those personal artifacts and those items, that must have made it quite enjoyable to decorate the other residents' rooms who've really
Yes.
been there. And one of them that comes to mind is Gladys's, because you've even got playbills for the shows that she describes
Yes.
having worked on in the theater, and just all these props and artifacts. And what was it like designing a lot of those supporting character spaces?
It's interesting because I think looking at a retirement community, these are people that they've lived full lives. They've probably moved out of homes or apartments or condos. And there's a lot of stuff that you collect in life, just stuff. And if you have to bring it into a 1-bedroom apartment, what do you bring? What's important? So I think with each character, we tried to find what would be important to them, like what were their memories. Like Calbert was his son and baseball, and Gladys was all about the theater and all the friends that she had made. And we had drawings done because that was her thing, to sketch the people that she did remember. So we tried to sort of bring people's personal lives in and their characters in, but also really distill it down to something that could just fit in a 1-bedroom apartment.
I also thought it was so interesting with Stephanie Beatrice's character with Dee Dee. When you look at her office space, the fact that it really observes and kind of connects to a lot of the spaces around her, so she can kind of see the ship that she's steering.
Yes.
Was that something that you all talked about and that was very intentional from the beginning as an idea?
Yes, it was. It was really designed around that office so that she could see everything. And it was a conversation that I had with Mike very early on. He wanted Dee Dee to be fully in control. And the way that I could spatially create that was to put a lot of windows in. And she could see right to the front door, assuming that she could see everybody that comes and goes. She could see into the dining room. At a quick glance, she could see into the bar. She could really sort of see everywhere and sort of always be in control of her environment. So it was important to also give her privacy. So, of course, we put blinds everywhere, but at the same time, it was really about her being able to see everything and be in control.
Yeah. And you also have all these communal spaces for all of the residents to really commune in. And there's a function room which has all these different activities. So it has to work for yoga classes. It also has to work for them putting on a play for some of the other residents in there. How did you set about figuring out what it was going to look like in all the different areas where they commune?
Well, so what we did, of course, we only had a stage to build this on, and we filled the whole stage wall to wall. But what we tried to do was, every time that we would say we were in a different activity room, we would change the panels on the wall so that you could feel like maybe that was a different floor. So every floor potentially had a room like this for the residents. So if you wanted to go to the theater practice, then you would go to the 14th floor. Or if you wanted to go to art class, you would go to the 3rd floor. So we tried to change up the activity space as much as we could. And it did help that, we had the elevators and we could sort of show Charles certainly going up and down and disappearing into different places. But we had to reuse all of our spaces, and that was certainly true with all of the apartments as well, because we only had 3 actual spaces for apartments, and we converted each one of those anytime that there was a different character. So I think we ended up with 7 apartments. So we would convert those apartments over. And then the communal spaces, it was really about like, what is the big event of the day? Whether it was the wedding or whether it was the play, or so we really had to just sort of reconfigure everything as much as we could. It was sort of like taking a puzzle box and just manipulating it as much as we could.
And designing a space like that as well, it's not even just about the design of the space. You have to also think about the realistic functionality for these characters.
Yes.
It has to feel accessible. Is there enough space between the tables for wheelchairs potentially
That's
to
right.
come through? And
That's right.
you're not going to have bathtubs. It's all going to be showers that people can easily get in and out
Right.
of. What was the research like in just figuring out all of those details?
I went to go visit quite a few retirement communities. What was interesting about visiting a lot of the retirement communities is I think what came through in the design of the show is that it's not places for people to go and die. It's places for people to go and continue living. So in doing the research, we saw a lot of that. Like there were a ton of activities that people were always doing, and the spaces were much larger than normal because there's people with walkers and there's people with wheelchairs, and they're still absolutely 100% coherent mentally, and maybe physically they're a little disabled, but they're still there and they're still living their lives. So we really had to think about that. And also our actors are a much older group. It's not like having 20 somethings who can kind of squeeze around and do things. And, we really had to accommodate not only for our actors, but also for the characters themselves being older.
And did that idea of it's a community for people to really be living also play into a lot of the colors and the textures and the
Yes,
lighting that you were thinking
absolutely. We tried to bring in a lot of pattern just to make it feel more lively and brighter colors. And I think also when we went into the neighborhood, we really wanted to sort of change it from what the rest of the community felt like and brighten it way up. So I chose a pink wallpaper that was just much more lively. And also because Charles what he assumed his wife went through, we didn't want that to come through at all. We wanted to feel just super lively.
Yeah. And in talking about some of the other character spaces with Lila Rich Creek Estrada's character, Julie, who's the one who hires Charles to be this private investigator for her, she's also in her own way kind of become a little bit closed off as well. And so there's a little cooler tones in her space and, kind of in a different way to Charles. It's not necessarily filled with personal artifacts. How did you decide what that was going to look like?
Well, in reading the scripts, it was very clear that she was all business all the time and very just sort of cold. And we wanted that to sort of come through in the architecture. So we wanted her to be in a more industrial space that felt harder and had cleaner edges and maybe even a little gritty, like she was in the city. So we did choose, much cooler tones and tried to keep everything a little bit harder.
And You also then on the opposite side of the spectrum have Mary Elizabeth Ellis, Emily's character space, and that just feels so lived in by a family.
Yes.
Was that just a completely different experience building out a space like that?
Yes. Yeah. They're all very distinct spaces, certainly. And Emily, of course, with the kids, I feel like anytime I design a space with kids, especially kids that are of a certain age, teenagers, it's always a disaster. Having had a stepson, it was, I sort of pulled some of that in because it is always a constant disaster. And it's like, can you please pick this up? Can you please take that to your room? And it just never happens. And it's, I think Mike also having teenagers, it's the same thing. It's the backpack that just gets dropped on the floor as soon as they walk through the door. I think there's a lot of that. And so, it's harder to create than you would think, actually, because it's obviously organized chaos because mom and dad always come and kind of clean up. So it's like you make the first pass and then you layer on a second and then you come back and you kind of clean up a little bit and then you put another layer on top of that just to sort of make it feel like a family really lives there.
Yeah. And kind of circling back to Charles and his spaces and what you were bringing up earlier, that he's put all of his wife's things away, but he's kind of able to confront it and bring it back into the home. And I've heard you mention that you kind of wanted the storage space to feel like before he put all her things there, that it used to be a place that he would kind of tinker
That's
around
right.
in.
Yeah.
How did that shape something which seems really insignificant, like a storage part of the house, but also just making sure it felt character driven, even for something like that?
Yeah, I think with Charles, it was at one point his space. It was sort of where he went to go tinker and where he would do some engineering models or, do a little bit of work. And so we sort of layered that in first. And I think the other nice thing about that space was that not only did it feel like a storage space, but it also felt like it was hidden away. It was a basement. So we left everything sort of exposed, all the electrical, the air conditioning, so that it felt like if he put things down there, it would just disappear out of his mind. And we tried to make it feel like once he locked that door, that was it. His wife had passed away and he separated himself from that. So it was his first, then his wife's stuff, and then once the door was locked, that was it.
And what was it like then getting to almost redesign the house once he feels like he's ready to bring her things back into it and to kind of confront those emotions?
It was fun. We tried to, when we first came up with the concept of Charles having this very architectural house, I knew that I wanted very sort of subtle, earthy colors right from the beginning, so that when we did transition out of that, we could use bright, vibrant colors. And part of the way that we did that was by using his wife's paintings because they were so bright and vibrant. And then we also changed a lot of the books and the pillows. And so everything that was brown became a red, or everything that was yellow became a green, so that it just sort of heightened the color and made it feel like he was more alive himself.
Wasn't there a piece of artwork as well that like Mike Scher kind of just like drafted an outline of an animal to be like, this is what I think it should look like?
Yes. I mean, having worked with Mike for so very long, I have a collection of his drawings, and he knows that he is not an artist. He has admitted so much. But yes, the dog painting that was Emily's that you see, it went through a lot of iterations because Mike wanted essentially what he had drawn, which was a very terrible drawing of a dog. And our prop master had hired someone to draw, and it was, I think we pretty much traced over Mike's drawing at one point and kind of handed it back to him and said, like this. He was like, yeah, exactly like that. So yes, the drawing that ends up, or the painting that ends up right next to his kitchen is Emily's drawing. That's Mike's rendition of the dog.
I love the incredible level of detail, and it was such a great first season. I can't wait to see the second season, which I know you're working on at the
Yes,
moment.
we're working on currently, and it'll be out
Yay.
the next year,
Yay.
2025.
Can't wait. Thank you so much, Ian.
Yes, thank you.